Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I am your host, JP John Paz. With me today is a promoter out there from Ireland, of course, Irish Whip Wrestling. He is Mr. Simon Rochford. Simon, welcome to the two-man power trip. How you doing?
Hello, John. How are you? Thanks for having me on your podcast. I'm looking
Yes,
forward to it.
yes, all the way
Um,
out there in Ireland. Nice.
have you ever had anybody speak Irish to you, Gaelic?
No, not that I can remember.
Tá sé bhainne, chuna sa táú, Simon is Adam Dum, Dillion O'Douse, TG Carter.
You're
There you
speaking
go.
Game of Thrones right now. I don't know what that
There's a
is.
force for you.
Almost sounds like Game of Thrones a little bit.
Game of Thrones, yeah, that's its very own unique kind of
Yeah, yeah. So what's going on?
Anglo-Saxon language. Huh?
Yeah. What's going on in your world? What have you been up to?
So for me, I've ran wrestling in Ireland for almost 20 years. So I would have had a national territory where I go all over the country. And I've been to Wales, Scotland, and England, but I haven't ran since COVID. So when COVID came in, I kind of got used to not doing shows, and I didn't really end up missing wrestling. So what I did there recently was there was an old Irish wrestler called Irish Pat Barrett. I don't know if you've ever heard of Pat, have you? Yeah.
Oh yeah, he
So
was big in the WWF with Vince McMahon Senior, and the old days. He feuded with Davey O'Hannon for a bit.
that's right, actually. Yeah. Not long before he passed, he was actually talking about Davy O'Hannon and Kevin
Oh,
Sullivan to me.
oh,
He was there in
just talking to Kevin. Oddly enough.
1963. He first went to WWF, and then he went again in the mid 70s. So he wrestled all over the world, but he was a very old school wrestler. He was very much a heel in his real life. I suppose for 4 decades, he was convincing people he was real, and he was a championship amateur wrestler. But he carried that over into his life when he returned home to live in Ireland. So people never knew how to take him because he was always he was a very tough guy, and he's always trying to haggle with people. Like, but anyway, with Pat, I remember chatting to Pat, and I kept saying to him, like, I'd see him on and off over the years, and I was saying about putting some of his stories together as an interview. And he wasn't into it. He was very much still in the kayfabe. But then when I convinced him to do it, unfortunately, he passed away within maybe a week, just over a week after that. So he had all this energy and passion for putting a podcast together or a YouTube show around Pat. So after he passed, I ended up setting up Irish Whip Wrestling Chronicles podcast. And it was just about Irish Whip wrestling history and stuff that's gone on in Ireland over the years. So I'm kind of enjoying that. It's a kind of a creative release at the moment, like, thanks to
Pretty.
Pat.
Yeah, yeah, pretty cool. When did he pass?
He passed November of last year.
Wow.
He caught COVID and he went to the hospital and he died within 2 days being in hospital, which was unfortunate because he was always a very strong character, like,
Damn,
old
how
Pat.
old was he when he passed?
He was 80, at 85, I think. He was in his 80s.
Oh, he's up
He
there.
always tried to hide his age. He always used to try and say he was younger. He was quite the handsome man back in his day, and he used to carry himself. And he was very strong still. He was in great shape when he passed. But yeah, he did loads. He tagged with the likes of Dominic Danucci, Andre the Giant for Billy Graham, Rocky Johnson, Peter Maivia. He was pretty big in Canada and down in Australia, New Zealand as well. Like, so there was never an Irish guy to travel like that and have the career that he did up until modern day WWE.
Yeah, it's funny that they kind of say McIntyre was like the first, but he's really not even close.
As the first Scottish guy,
Well, yeah, I guess he's
yeah,
more the
yeah,
Scottish, but like I guess Pat Barrett really is the first Irish guy, right? If you
yeah,
think about it, he
first
had to
guy
have been.
from the Republic of Ireland. So you have Fifth Finlay, who's from Northern
Yes.
Ireland,
Yep.
and then did you ever hear of a guy called Shillelagh O'Sullivan? His real name Pat McMahon.
No. Mm-mm.
So he was an Irish Catholic from Northern Ireland. So he wrestled in Toronto for the 20s back in the day. And he did a very little bit. When I say little bit, maybe 4 or 5 shows for the WWF back in the day, which didn't really work out for him. So yeah, they're always it's wrestling. People always claim to be the first. I know
Yep.
one of the Highlanders is Scottish.
Yeah,
So he was
Rory.
in
Yeah.
WWE. And if you remember the guy called oh, geez, I'm trying to give it. He was there in the 80s. He used to wrestle Scott Casey wrestled as one stage. Jeff Ports, I think, is his real name. He wrestled in Stampede. He was an enhancement talent with the WWE, so he was Scottish, as far as I know. But again, there you go. So Drew McIntyre wasn't the first Scottish guy.
Yeah, yeah, definitely not. Yeah, yeah. With that, was Davey O'Hannon really from
No, he
Ireland, or
was.
was he really from Boston or something?
Yeah, he was Irish American. So you had lots of guys back in the day who were Irish American that they would claim was Irish. So even Randy Orton's granddad, he used to wrestle as an Irish wrestler back with the WWF. Obviously, he wasn't Irish. Like, so it's what he did in the day. He passed him off as certain countries. Skull Murphy was Canadian, and he passed him off as Irish as well. Like, you know.
There was a little guy named Hulk Hogan that used to pretend he was Irish for a bit. Yeah.
That's right, actually. Yeah, Irish, the big Irish American guy, and Ivan Koloff. Ivan Koloff was pushed as Irish back in his early careers. Red something.
Oh, yes, yes. Yep. Before he became Ivan Koloff, obviously,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Russian Terror. Yeah. Yep.
So, well, you had all these Irish wrestlers. Not many of them were actually Irish.
That's so funny. I guess they liked the ethnicity back then. They were making sure certain guys were certain ethnicity.
Yeah, and there was a chap called Tim Gagan. Have you ever heard of Tim Gagan, old Irish wrestler?
Doesn't sound familiar, no.
He was from the west of Ireland. Now, again, he did kind of like Pat. He hadn't got the career that Pat had. He started off as a boxer. He went all over Canada, all over America. Vancouver, he was pretty big in the old Pacific Northwest, the Clonowns territory.
Yep. BNW, yep.
He was there as well, but he passed away there in the early 2000s. But again, nobody really remembers him, and he was a genuine Irishman, you know.
Speaking of you and Irish whip wrestling, like, how did that start? How did you kind of get in and start promoting? Because you said you've been promoting for 20 plus years.
20 years. So the way it happened with me was I was going to set up a wrestling magazine called Irish Whip. So with the amount of cost that went into that, the administration, the legal, it was costing so much money that I said to myself, I might try and build a promotion. Now, at the time, myself and Shamus used to work in the same bar. I was a bartender, he was a bouncer. And that's how we became friends. I had a wrestling magazine I was reading one day. We got chatting. And I was going to push him from the beginning as, the Irish guy there. So he went off and he went to, his mom lived in America at the time. So he went to, I think it was New Jersey, where the Monster Factory is.
Yep.
That's New Jersey. Yeah. So he went there to train, and he had mixed stories on it when he came back. It didn't really work out for him the way it did work. So he came back to Ireland, and then I started to use him around 2004. But prior to that, to go back to 2002, there was no Irish training schools. There was no Irish talent in Ireland at the time. So I had to use international guys. So I'd bring in the likes of Tatanka, PNUs, Mike Modest. So as you can understand, it was very, very costly flying these guys in. And I booked a big 2,000-seat arena for 2 shows. And I worked in bars. So I was used to promoting music acts to adults. So I advertised to adults, but I didn't get the numbers I thought I would. So I had a big 2,000-seat arena, and I had roughly 300 people in for the first show, 500 for the second show. And then I completely changed the format. And I started to advertise to families, to kids, to young people. And then I brought Jake the Snake in while he was living in England. He was quite a character back then. And I ran the same arena and got 1,200 people when I knew how to market wrestling towards a younger audience and a more family audience. Whereas now wrestling has changed in Europe. It's more for the adults than it is for young people. So it's gone around full circle.
Are you still buddies with Shamus?
No. We stayed in contact for a long time. He looks after my eldest son, Ben, with tickets and so forth whenever they come over here. So I can't fault him for that. But we had some strong disagreements, and we ended our friendship, which was unfortunate because he was the best man at my wedding when I did get married. Me, him, and Drew were quite tight, but again, it's wrestling. There's a lot of animosity on both sides at one stage, so that was the end of that friendship. But fairness to the lads, they've gone on now and done extremely well for themselves.
You're not in contact with Drew anymore either?
No, I'm not in contact with Drew again. Drew and Shamus met here. Um, I was very fond of those two lads at the time. I could tell they were talented. We used to have Pock. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yep.
PAC. I remember when he would come in, I used to see the same thing in Pock. He was a very talented guy, looked good, and you could see he was very career driven, and that's what those two lads were like. Um, my last interactions technically with Drew were through the WWE with his. Do you remember they did a special on him for WrestleMania? I don't know if it was when he won the belt or after he won the belt. So they wanted some footage licensed off me for that. I didn't want to do it. I kind of lost interest when it came to COVID. He said, oh, he really wants it to put it in. So I said, okay, license the footage for that. I got paid. That's fair enough. They did his book. They asked to license some pictures for his book. I said, okay, but I didn't get paid. So that kind of left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth with them. So when I think of Drew, I just think of the WWE own me money. And at the moment, they used, I don't know if they still use it on his Titantron, but when they did Clash in the Castle in Wales, I got a text off some people and said, I see they're using Irish Whip footage again. So I didn't get paid for that either. So when I think of Drew now, I just think of money that WWE owes me that they didn't pay me for regards footage. So it's weird how you make the mind connection with some people and individuals, isn't it?
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like that would be obviously if they're using your stuff, they got to pay you. I mean, right? You would
Yeah.
think.
Which, and in fairness to them, they've used a lot of stuff from me over the years for clips and so forth. They would pay me. I'd sign the license agreement. They were in talks, and technically they're still in talks to want to buy the Irish Whip Wrestling library off me because I used to have a TV show over here, ran for 2 seasons, and I had a number of DVDs and a number of guys on those DVDs who were now WWE or AEW Japanese talent. Um, I thought it was sold 2 or 3 times. I was told, yeah, we just send over the paperwork, so it never happened. So when they started to use the footage without paying me, they did it for Drew again on the Stone Cold show. He did his podcast on the network. I didn't get paid for that either. So again, that's what Drew. Now in the end, they ended up paying me for some of the stuff they owed me for. But I just find it very surprising for like a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded sports entertainment brand that realistically is bigger than UFC. You would put it up there with the likes of Sony, with Netflix, with Amazon that don't pay their bills or they kind of take advantage of the small businessman. That was very surprising to me. But that's gone on now about 3 years. So they still have all my hundreds and hundreds of mini DV tapes and external and internal hard drives and so forth, like, you know. But that's going on, yeah, almost 3 years now. So WWE have not paid their bills when it comes to Simon Rochford and Irish Whip Wrestling. But
Interesting.
on the positive, in fairness to the WWE, when Pat Barrett passed away, I did contact the guy I was dealing with in there, and I asked him, could he do something for Pat's memory? In fairness to him, he sent over some flowers and he sent a signed letter from Vince McMahon for Pat's family and friends. I read that out at Pat's eulogy at his funeral, and I know that really touched his friends that were there, and some people cried, and they didn't realize he was that well respected by WWE and Vince McMahon. So that was something very positive that they did do, like, you know. And again, with Shamus, with my eldest son, giving him tickets, that's a positive. So pros and cons, like everything in life, you know.
Maybe they don't know, not to give them an out, or maybe they don't know that they don't own the footage. You know, whoever's putting the stuff together.
They do. I was on to numerous people. I made a formal complaint.
Oh, okay. So they do know.
Fastlane, do you remember that was the first? I don't know what they call pay-per-views now. They call it something else, but that was the first event
Premium
they had.
live events.
That's it. So that was the first event that was on Peacock. So I got a call off someone to tell me that they had seen footage of a build-up of Shamus and Drew on the buy-in show and then on the Fastlane actual pay-per-view live event show itself. So when I did contact them, they blamed it on the swap over that the Peacock staff had done that. So they are aware of it, like, you know, and they just choose not to acknowledge it. I was professional. I was always very courteous, went down my way. I offered maybe to pay me a retainer until the sale goes through to use any content that they want. They said no, but they still used said content, Um, like example, you were asking about Shamus earlier and Drew. So I know those times I'd license stuff for Shamus, and it would be like kind of a sly dig at myself for Irish Whip, which I didn't mind. Like I said, there's history there, and I got paid. At the end of the day, if you're getting paid, you can't complain. But it was when they didn't pay is when I took issue with it. But look, I don't lose any sleep. I still have my life, my home, my family, which is important, you know.
So outside of the WB stuff and the Shamus and the Drew stuff, when you're putting Irish Whip together, who's like some other big names that you had? I know you had tons of them come through. Who's some other big names?
So when we started out first, like I said, one guy I used who was very helpful on the days was Robbie Brookside. So he's a
Oh yeah,
coach now down in Performance Centre. People who don't know Robbie Brookside, Robbie to me would be like a William Regal. He's that veteran. He's that intelligent when it comes to wrestling. He knows wrestling inside out. He's a good guy. He's funny, charming. So I'm surprised he never went further within his career with the WWE. Maybe he's happy down in Florida. He wouldn't want to live in Florida, he was on the shows. We had Just Joe. Do you remember Just Joe? Joey
Joe
Legend.
Legend. Yeah,
So he wrestled him. And I remember there's a promoter told me about Just Joe. He was a nice guy, Joey Legend. He said, just be careful when you're booking him. Give him his time. He always goes over time. So it's fair enough. I gave the match for something like 10 minutes. All in all, entrance to exit, it goes like 25 minutes, which I thought was hilarious. Like, so he did go over, but still, it was an extra 10 minutes on the show that fans enjoyed, So yeah, there was actually, and I had, this is where I made a big mistake on the first show I ran. So at the time, I brought in Zandig and Justice Payne to have a hardcore barber hurley match. So in Ireland, we have a hurley, which is their version of a baseball bat. It was all wrapped up in hurls and the light tubes. That was a mistake because it was spraying out into the crowd. I thought it was going to get sued. People enjoyed it, but it was too hardcore for what the show was and people who were there. They enjoyed it. They had two matches on the day. They swapped the title back and forth. And that chap, God bless him, Justice Payne, he committed suicide there, I believe, a few years ago, which
yeah.
is unfortunate, And after that, you had a ladder match on. So there was a Hungarian wrestler called Michael Kovac and an Austrian guy called Chris the Bandy Killer, who I think he was signed to a development deal at one stage. They were doing a TLC match. So when I look back now at what I did then, how I put a show together, it was a mess. I really didn't know what I was doing. Whereas obviously as time goes on, you learn how to put a show together, who to use, who not to use, how to get return business. But it was a learning curve from the very naive mistakes that I made in the day. But over the years, yeah, I would have had 2 seasons of Whiplash TV, which broadcast primarily in Britain and Ireland. And it went as far as France and France and Spain. So I would bring in a lot of touring guys. There's a guy called Brian Dixon, a promoter over in England, who, again, doesn't get the credit he deserves for the promoter that he was. He ran the biggest promotion, not only in Europe, but one of the biggest promotions in Europe. And he gave a lot of work to people over the years, So when he would have guys in from whatever, America, Canada, I would use a lot of them on shows here, DVD tapings or tours. There was guys you had over that I had planned to use, and at the last minute you pulled them off me. People like Brian Danielson, Matthew Neihart. Who else did he have? Simbo D. Now I can understand, because if you come in for me, I might have 2 shows on that weekend where he might need him for a week-long camp, So there's no animosity there, but it was just a shame. If I had had them in, I would have had more well-known names on the archive footage that I own, So the TV tapings were interesting. The 2 series that I put together, I used to tape 4 shows. So for anybody out there that's ever going to tape TV shows, do 2 maybe at most, I'd recommend. When you put 4 together, the audience just leave in droves. They get bored, especially when it's kids. You have a half full building. So it wasn't until I ran season 2, and I dropped that down to 3 shows. And I would try to rush all the matches together and do promos the next day. So season 2 was much better of Whiplash TV than season 1. Season 1, I really didn't know as a, I wouldn't call myself a TV producer, but a format in a TV show. Season 2 to season 1, I knew big time the differences going into it. Like, so anyone out there that's ever formatting DVDs, or well, DVDs are a thing of the past now, but streaming a show, it really is for the people watching online. Some people forget that, and they format a streaming show as if it is a house show or a live event, which it's not really. Like, it's for people. You're going to get that bigger audience paying, hopefully more. The way pay-per-view is, obviously, you hope to get like a much bigger audience paying to watch your product. So always make sure that you're putting the best show on for people who are watching your show via streaming channels.
How'd you get on TV though? How'd you get the national TV spot?
So how I got the TV spot was through a guy called Sean Herbert. So I knew Sean. I used to do tape trading in the day. So I was the only tape trader in Ireland back
Wow.
20 years ago. So I'd have stuff from Japan, I'd have it from Europe, Mexico, obviously America, Canada. And I would get to know guys through selling on the tapes, or they might put requests in. So that's where I met Sean. He was a big wrestling fan. And then he did it. Actually, he recorded the first couple of shows, Irish Whip shows I did. And he told me of his plans to put a wrestling channel together. And he put a lot of work into that, actually. A lot of work is. And again, people forget who Sean is to a degree, what the wrestling channel was. But the wrestling channel at the time was the first of its kind in the world. Now, I know in Japan, they had some kind of a wrestling channel, but it wasn't a Pacific Soul only wrestling channel as such. So he had that. He eventually sold that to Fight Sports. Is that what they call it in Canada? Fight Network?
Yeah, the Fight
Yeah.
Network. Yeah.
Eventually sold it to them, and then it went out of business. But his two biggest shows, for all the promotions he broadcast, his two biggest shows were World of Sport, which at that stage was like 30, 40 years old. Like, you know, some of the footage was 50 years old. And you used to get higher ratings for that than you would for, say, TNA or Ring of Honor. So I always found that quite interesting. And the company who funded the wrestling channel, you were from England, a company called Dolphin House, who did all the advertising for Sky TV. They had two channels with Sean after that, Movies for Men, and another movie channel, which the name escapes me. And they used to show World of Sport on that too, because it got such high ratings. So World of Sport, for some people who watch it with the it's kind of old school wrestling, it's very boring. In the day, it was brilliant, and obviously it still has an audience that they would show that on those channels to get people to tune in to watch movies. Like, so long story short, that's how I got onto the wrestling channel, was through Sean. I ran it for 2 seasons. Again, it was with the wrestlers that would come in, regardless if they were Irish, English, American, unless they were really experienced with like a WCW maybe or a WWE, their awareness of where the camera was very bad. They would turn their back to the cameras, they go run over on the time, and we had to take 20 shots. Like, Drew was terrible. No, Drew was an excellent talent. But when it came to promos, it would take 20, 30 promos to get one promo. Like, so eventually what would happen was the editor wouldn't include the promos because you have to go through so many, or the vignettes and so forth. And then it just became matches and you weren't edited. And it became a lot of work for everybody. And I was making more money for merchandise and ticket sales from live events than it was from the TV show. So I just decided there's no point in doing the TV show. It's taken away from what I'm making at live events. Then when I went into DVDs, I used to sell a ton of DVDs. And you'd sell them like euros, maybe 20 euros. By the end of it, it was very hard to sell DVDs, and you might sell DVDs for €5. And eventually you couldn't even sell them, like, you know. So it's crazy how the business has changed, like, you know, it really is. For me as a person, from a business point of view, I learned so much from wrestling that I promoted music events and so forth. I tribute acts, people like The Cure and so forth. And I've used the skills I learned with live events and wrestling, dealing with some of those international talents and venues to get better deals. Eventually I'd sell shows on, and yeah, I did quite well at wrestling, so I've no animosity towards wrestling whatsoever. I enjoyed it when I was younger, obviously, and when I was running shows, I made money from it, And yeah, I've nothing but positive things to say about pro wrestling. You see some people who leave it and hate or bad
Yep.
experience that they had. But wrestling, it can, if you're a wrestler, you're a promoter, even a fan, you can have your bad experiences with wrestling. It's very it can be a very toxic business at times, very self-absorbed, and people are very selfish. But if you let that get into your mind, it just ruins your own experience. Like, so you're just best controlling your own experiences within wrestling as a fan or a performer.
As far as TV, who did you help like expose to the world, or really expose to
So
Europe? But who did you help?
yeah, so in Europe, so Irish Whip Wrestling, Whiplash TV, it was the only TV show at the time in the whole of Europe. So I would have primarily used a lot of touring talent at the time. Come season two, I knew exactly who I wanted to use. So, for example, I'll talk with season two here. Now, season one and two, I had Drew on it and I had Shamus on it. They're probably the most well-known names that people would know. Season one, I had Finn Balor, and he came in to do some shows. Again, I booked him in a match for 15 minutes. He went 6 minutes. It was just calling the time, so I lost out. I had to try and fill those extra. Yeah, well, it wasn't a live TV show, but I had to find something to fill those minutes. He went short in his match. So little problems like that. They were good problems, I suppose. But when you see him now, obviously, is a tremendous talent. He does pay-per-views, TV shows. Japan, he was a top talent over there. So again, like I said earlier on myself, you learn these things as you go along. So with Sheamus and Drew, Shamus was a big guy, so I knew a lot of the Irish talent, most of the Irish talent, weren't to his caliber, size-wise. So I wanted to bring in guys for him to fight. So we had a guy called Madman Manson. He was a tall guy, so I used to feud him with Drew. And it worked well, but it ran its course. Season two, I wanted Drew to feud with Sheamus. I wanted Drew to have his own little, be a cowardly heel. Even though he's a big guy, a cowardly heel, he has his guys, and that's who Sheamus fights. So we didn't have to rely on Irish guys. I could bring in English guys or British guys for Sheamus to fight. And it worked out perfect. Now, I know Drew in his book took credit for his little group was called the Foreign Legion, and he put this idea together. Where I got the idea of the Foreign Legion from was actually from indirectly from Conan. So Conan down in Mexico TV had a group called the Foreign Legion, and they were people on the outside who would come in to fight the local Mexican faces. So that's where I got the idea from, of bringing in a group of outside Irish faces to face the big Irish hero, which was Sheamus, and it worked extremely well, So I had Sheamus, obviously, he went on to get signed from that TV show, Drew McIntyre. There was a French lad, Pierre Marceau here. He spent some time in Florida. I don't know what he was called there. And he went to TNA after that. There was two French guys. One was the French Stallion. Good-looking guy, ripped, a beard. It wasn't him. It was his tag team partner. Wade Barrett was here. Wade came in. I think it was Shamus who told me about Wade. He met him in Wales. Wade came in with a guy called Dave Steele. The two of them look good. Big, tall guys. Monsters is what you wanted. But Wade had something to him, how he carried himself, his facials, So I ended up using him long term in that feud as well with Sheamus, which I'm very surprised that he just stays as a commentator these days, because he is quite talented and he had got a good look back in the day,
Yeah, I wonder if he has some sort of neck injury or something. Why he
maybe
isn't
actually, yeah,
wrestling? Yeah,
because he is a good talent, And Drew, I'm not surprised that Drew, to tell you the truth, when Drew went over, he got to TV so quick. I wasn't surprised because he had that. You could tell him and Pac. You could tell there was something there. Drew, I wouldn't be surprised at the success he had at the time and what he's gone on to become, because he's absolutely brilliant. Sheamus, while he was equally as good, he wasn't Drew,
Yep.
So when he got onto TV, I thought he needed a lot of work when he got to America, but I think he's had a tremendous career. He's reinvented himself so many times. He changes his look. Somebody had told me he had a match with Walter. I went and I checked it out. It was a tremendous match. And the fact that he stayed on TV as a regular character for, what's it now, 15 years? Just
pretty
goes to
much.
show you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
15 or 16. Yeah, it's been a while. Yep.
So that says a lot about him as a as a performer, like, and as an athlete on top of that.
Man, it's crazy to think like how long that they've lasted. Drew, I know Drew got released and came back, but crazy to think how long they've kind of been on TV for. It's nuts. It's like 15,
It is.
16 years.
And if you think of Finn Balor as well, like he is, I know he's a smaller guy than the other two, but he's tremendously talented. Like he's a great athlete, he's a great technical wrestler. Obviously he's doing well there now. Like so, in Japan, he was tremendous in Japan. I'm surprised he hasn't got a bigger part than he has now at the moment. Like, or it took him to get where he is now. Like, because he is a tremendous talent, And another person, while she was around the Irish Whip shows, she used to come back in the day and hang out. She used to come to some of the shows with Finn, was Becky Lynch. Now, Becky had a brother called Richie. Richie Quinn is his name, but he wrestled as Gonzo de Mondo. And he was trained by Finn Balor. He was a big guy, wasn't very good with a mic or doing interviews, but tremendous wrestler, great technician, brilliant heel. You could put him out there, automatically you get heat off people. But he kind of left wrestling. He wasn't interested anymore. He's a sculptor now and an artist, and he does quite well for himself. But I always think of him, he definitely had it in him to be a minimum in the farm system with Florida. I can't know what it was called at the time, and then became next.
FCW,
he definitely had that in him, like, 100%. Anyway, Becky Lynch. Becky Lynch is, it's unusual one because she came into wrestling. She went abroad. She made a name for herself. Didn't work out. She hurt herself. That's why it didn't work out. She came back, tried all these different careers, and the flight attendant, tried to be an actor, stunt coordinator. She gave, from what I was told by her trainer, she decided to give it one more go. Then she got signed. She went to Florida, and then while she was in Florida, I believe she was having problems down there, as in maybe being cut. She made it to the main roster. Look at her now. She, like Becky, I wouldn't see her as a top female talent. I would see her as a top actual talent within the wrestling industry. Like she's like Peter Dinklage. Dinklage, is that his name? The small guy from Game of Thrones.
Peter Dinklage.
Dinklage. You don't think of him as a small part. You think of him as a great actor. Yep. So when you look at Becky Lynch, you don't see a female wrestler. You see a top talent. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make with Becky is I'm surprised nothing's been done with her, like a movie or a book, because she's had a tremendous personal life journey up and down to get where she is. Millionaire. I believe she's making movies, TV shows now. She's married to just handsome Greek-looking guy, Seth Rollins, Yep. So yeah, I think there's something there for WWE to delve into deeper with her. I think she realistically, I could see her transcending wrestling the way John Cena has or Batista, like,
I think she's playing Cyndi Lauper in The Young Rock, which is The Rock's TV show on NBC.
Really?
So she's getting into that world a little bit. So you might be onto something there.
Yeah, fair play to her. I'll have to check that out.
Were you surprised at how popular she became? Because it seems like you weren't surprised. You seem like you were right. Because
I wasn't
when
surprised
she was the
that
man,
she became popular.
number one.
Like, it's tremendous. Like the point I'm trying to make is that it didn't work out for her the first time, so she tried all these different things like acting, a stunt woman, an air hostess. But she tried these. Some people, when they failed the first time, they give up completely, and you talk about what you were for the rest of their life. They talk about what you were in the past. But she's done so much again and again and again. And look where she is now. And you were saying there, she's doing the TV shows. Yep. I think she's going to have a huge career outside of wrestling. And obviously, she's had a great career in it. So again, I don't think she's somebody who gets the credit she should get of the journeys that she's had to get where she is. Like, because she's worked for it. Like, some guys you could say they're big, tall, they're muscular guys, or somebody's gorgeous looking. But she's actually walked each step of the way to get where she is, and that says a lot about people in life, not just in wrestling. Like, inspirational people.
Yeah, yeah. She's had quite a run, quite a career. So,
there has been people I've seen in wrestling who, look, we're talking about Becky's brother Richie. I had some guys here that I thought were really good. Have you ever heard of a group in Ireland called OTT?
Yes.
So in OTT, Joe, who's the owner of OTT, he used to wrestle here in Irish Whip. and his brother wrestled here as well, called George McFly. He was on season 2. Yeah, season 2 of Whiplash TV. Excellent talent. So obviously Joe went on and he got signed with the development system. But his brother George, excellent talent, good looking guy, great shape, great in the ring, not natural charisma. But he gave up wrestling. He did some jiu-jitsu and went on elsewhere with his life. So with him as well, I would have been interested to see where he would have gone if he stayed at wrestling, like, you know. I had a guy here called Mandrake, Garrett Kidd. He was tremendous. But at the time, Shamus had blocked guys in Irish Whip from getting tryouts because that we had. And I remember Fit Finlay passing the word back through a very well-known old Irish promoter called Peter Nulty. And he said to me, look, Fit Finlay's after saying, tell your guys not to mention Irish Whip wrestling because of the heat with Shamus. Fine. But if that heat wasn't there, I could definitely see Mandrake being in the farm system and potentially getting some kind of a spot on the main roster, maybe as opening mid-card. He was that talented, like, and he was a legit martial artist as well. He had charisma, work ethic was through the roof, like. So he's somebody else that, unfortunately, he left wrestling and he became an instructor. He has his own MMA gym now, like, you know, and he's a musician too, like, but he was an excellent talent. I on my podcast, I interviewed him actually, Mandrake Garrett Kidd, and he talks about some of his experiences when he went to his tryouts. Eventually, when he did get his tryouts, like, so it's quite interesting with him. And I'm sure there's lots of guys that could have similar stories in America, Canada, England, the whole lot, who were good that just didn't make it.
Didn't get to there, yeah.
Yeah, and then have you ever heard of a group called FWA in England, Frontier Wrestling Alliance?
Yeah, they had a deal with ROH. I want to say in like
Yeah,
03,
that's
04,
them.
they had like a working agreement with them. Yeah, like Zebra Kid would wrestle and, you know, a few guys.
So Zebra Kid wasn't, even though we wrestled there, he was more his dad. Ricky Knight had his own thing going, WAW. So I wouldn't really call him an FWA trained guy.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
you know, he was kind of brought in. So the point I'm trying to make is, yes. So you had Doug Williams, Johnny Storm, Jody Fleisch these days, if you've
Yeah.
ever seen him. He's in
Yep.
tremendous shape. Like,
Oh, yeah. Him and Storm used to come over here and wrestle
yeah.
for Ring of Honor. They were awesome, yeah.
But something has happened. There's a lot of heat on the old FWA crew. That's why you've never seen them anywhere in development system or within WWE. So that's where your politics and wrestling come in, where people say politics if someone doesn't win or something childish or stupid, but that's a prime example of when somebody has heat with you in wrestling, they can really block a person or a group of people out from gaining career advancements, which is a shame because Doug Williams is very talented. Jody Fleisch, Nick Aldis. Now, I know Nick Aldis back in the day, I met him a couple of times. Terrible attitude. He's a changed man from what I believe, but tremendous look. Speaks very well, wrestles good, looks brilliant. He's a talent. I believe he has heat with somebody and he can't get in as well. Like, it's crazy, isn't it? Like, you wonder, would that happen in Coca-Cola? Would that happen in Amazon? You know, would an executive say, oh, well, you don't like that guy from your school days, we're not going to hire him. You should always hire someone who's very good for the job in the professional company. That's what the important part is, regardless of childish or immature problems with a person, like, you know. But that's wrestling.
Weird. Yeah, weird the way that works out. It's like you don't always hire the best people.
Exactly.
It's all politics, yeah.
Exactly. Shame,
with
really.
you, I mean, there was, I think, Wolfgang appeared on your team. I mean, there's so many guys that would end up in WWE, but also were yours once.
We had Wolfgang, so he came in for a couple of TV tapings. The Scottish scene, I have to say, really took off. What's the group over there called now? They're on the network.
Oh,
the group that's over here now.
I know it's a Scottish promotion. Insane Championship Wrestling?
Insane Championship Wrestling, that's it. They really took off. I remember them in the early days, Wolfgang and all those guys. They weren't great, but like overnight, and it's the same with the Germans, WXW, they advanced as well. To where they went from Ostenburg, I think it was called, one show every now and then to like literally a whole territory in Germany, top class production. So yeah, Wolfgang became great. There's another guy who was in Scotland. I can't think who he was offhand. Look, Jack Jester. Look, excellent, good talent as well. He never really went anywhere. We had Lionheart in here. Actually, just something else that brings me to. So Lionheart came in as well for some TV tapings. He was a Scottish guy. Now, unfortunately, he passed away. He committed suicide. So on my YouTube channel, I originally started it out as Suicide Fire. So it was about suicide awareness videos. It was about short stories, poetry, to basically encourage people if they are feeling that way to talk about it and, create a community. But people don't, while they say they're all for mental health and they're all for helping these people out, and when somebody passes away, in wrestling, between wrestlers and fans, and you're saying Justice Payne earlier on, there was a guy in Whiplash called Domino. He was the English version of Domino. Big guy. He wrestled Drew a couple of times on Whiplash. Lovely man, gentleman. But he committed suicide as well. And like, he was a guy you'd be like, what problems would he have? Like, he's big, he's good looking, he's a DJ, and it was a shame. So people don't like to talk about those kind of things. Like, they only talk about it in the moment when it happens and say it's terrible, it's awful. But people should be continually pushing these things. So with my YouTube channel, I only put wrestling on it, some old school Irish whip matches, to get some interest in the channel. But then I found that I was losing people who had joined for the creative content because of the wrestling. Like, so it was very hard to have a mixture on the channel. But that's something I think people need to speak about in wrestling. It's suicide in life in general. It's not a taboo subject. Like, I've had people who would like the page or whatever, and I go, oh, I didn't mean to like that. It's a suicide fire. But sure, that's okay. All you know is liking a page, and they think people will think they have a problem if they like a page called Suicide Fire. Like, it's a shame, really. Like, But like, to go back to WWE, AEW, New Japan, let's say, these big top shelf worldwide promotions, I feel they should be doing something more for an industry that does have a suicide rate, where that's some kind of an awareness through their own branding. Maybe putting workshops on, inviting people to workshops. Like, when they go to some countries to put tryouts on, why not have some kind of a workshop on, maybe for mental health awareness within the sports entertainment industry? Like, I know they talk about promotions having bigger production values and whatnot, but if you're going to have promotions with bigger production values, then fund them. Set up some kind of a system. If somebody, insurances, maybe have them all under one insurance policy. If people meet your standards of what you need to be somebody that's in your, what word would I use here? Your umbrella, say. If you're in Brazil, you're in Ireland, you're in Mexico, somebody that can come along and do things to your standards, and then automatically to go there and look for wrestlers, like, because if you look at it now, they're signing a lot of basketball players, football players, but they're in proper legit colleges that have all those kind of money and funding put into them to make them good athletes. Why not put something, if you're W or AEW or whoever at that level, back into the system to give somebody an athlete's mind? Because athletes, they're trained, there's consequences, they might lose. So build that kind of same mentality, the hard work of an athlete in a professional wrestler. Like, that's just my 2 cents.
Some more mental health awareness, for sure.
Mental health awareness, but also the mind of an athlete and a professional wrestler, which are two very different things. Like, indie professional wrestlers' mindset as a performer to that of a amateur football player. Their athletic mindset are completely different. If I was WWE, I don't blame them when they sign a lot of football players, for example, because it's like I said, they're aware of the consequences of losing the game, of needing to be in shape to get picked to be on that team. Whereas in professional wrestling on the indie level, you just get booked if you sell tickets, or you just get booked if you're trained in the skill for a while. Like, there's a big difference. So people need to think deeper when they give out about certain things that they see in the wrestling industry. Like,
For sure.
Mm.
Just switching topics, though, I'm always curious about Japan as well. You guys had a few deals or arrangements with like Pro Wrestling Noah and Dragon Gate and stuff too. So
Yeah.
you guys
So
had some great deals with Japan.
in the early days, the guy who set up that deal was Doug Williams. So to backtrack to 2002, I used Mike Modest on my 4 shows. Lovely guy, gentleman, do anything you want him to do. So I put Mike Modest, he was wrestling in Noah at the time in Japan. So I roomed him with Doug Williams. Doug made the contact. He got into Japan. Well, Doug was in Japan. Then he made a deal with Noah to bring their guys over to Europe. So they would wrestle around Europe. So when they came into Europe, I would use the guys who were touring around. Some excellent talent. Tajiri Ishimori, Goshiaki, Ricky Marvin, even though he's Mexican, he was with them at the time. I had Takeshi Rikio. He was an excellent talent. I remember
Big
it was a match
boy,
with
yeah.
him and Mandrake. So I have it up the YouTube channel, Suicide Fighter. It was a three-way, Kid Cash, Mandrake, and Takeshi. And it was a tough match. Like, Cash likes to lay it in, like, and you could see him, like, he'd lay it into your guy Mandrake, but he wouldn't lay it into Takeshi, because Takeshi'd lay it back into him, like. But all good guys, really good match. But those Japanese guys were excellent. And another guy who came in with Takeshi was a guy called Ippi Ota. Now, I believe he's left wrestling. He had an injury, but he was a character. He was funny, the whole lot. So when you're flying guys in, you have to pay for all the baggage. So I would say to them, like, you know, if you have your bags, can you just keep it to what if they're staying in England, say, you don't need to bring everything with you, because we'll have to pay extra for all those bags. So anyway, to work out wherever bags they needed, you pay for them. And I remember the driver was telling me when Ippi and Takeshi came out of the airport, they had their bags. So obviously Ippi was a younger guy, so he was carrying the bags for Takeshi. And then his own bags, he just opened it up, took his jacket off. They were completely empty, his suitcases.
Oh.
And he threw his bag into the suitcases. So I paid whatever it was, 40 quid a suitcase, and there was nothing in them. So I thought, oh, it was a rib, bringing empty suitcases for me to pay for them. But I just thought that was funny. He used the suitcase just to put his coat into.
Yeah.
It was like, yeah. And also then I did a deal myself with Dragon Gate.
Yeah, another
So,
great promotion.
yeah, oh, excellent, excellent. So I brought in, initially with them, it was SEMA and Dragon Gate. Not Dragon Kid. SEMA was saying at the time he was going to move to Greece. He had friends in Greece. So that didn't work out. I was going to plan to use him more. So the two of them would come in, and then while they were here, they'd go off and work elsewhere in Europe. Then I brought in the other two Dragon Gate guys were Lupton Mastana, I think his name was. He did a James Bond gimmick. Very nice guy. He had an injury. He left wrestling. And now I can't pronounce this guy's name. Kenchiri Arari. He did some work with Mexico as well, IRWG. Tough as nails. I remember him in some matches here with Kid Cash. They would beat the living hell out of each other in matches, trying to prove who was tougher. You know, the audience wouldn't have a clue, and they're beating the head off each other. Like, but one thing I have to say about Japanese wrestlers is they're very professional, they're very polite, they're very courteous. I actually loved working with Japanese wrestlers who were so easy to get on with, and they would do anything that was asked of them. Like, you know, a lot of respect for Japanese wrestlers.
And Dragon Gate, those guys were like ahead of their time. A lot of the moves that
Oh
they
my
would do
god!
and stuff that they pull off,
Yeah.
amazing.
I remember when they came over here that they'd bring some merchandise with them. And obviously, while we're here going around the country, then we'd be popping the DVD. And you'd see them coming out in the shows in Japan, the dancing, the umbrellas, the girls with them, the musical acts. Yeah, it was tremendous. I think if you had something like that now, you'd actually get an audience for it. Like, I know people give out, you hear people giving out about AEW and it's this and it's that, but it's an alternative to what the WWE is putting out. Like,
Big
they
time.
obviously have a fan base. I know some people say they have a bigger fan base, but they have a fan base, and that's what people like. So I think if you had something like Dragon Gate, even on top of that, with your dancing, your acts, and then your after elaborate entrances, you would have these fantastic matches. It would be tremendous, like, you know.
Yes. So with
But
Irish whip wrestling, is it gone for good? Will it ever return?
to tell you the truth, so what I would do, I would run all around the country all year long. So then what I started to do was, because wrestling, when you're running full-time promotion, takes over your whole life. Family life, your professional life. I have friends I lost contact with a whole lot, but you just get used to it. And you get so used to wrestling. But then I remember I got divorced back around 2010, and I had to cut back a bit to deal with the legalities of that. And I asked a guy, Captain Rooney, who wrestled on some of the shows, to step in for me. And I would do the admin side of it, and he would do the practical side of it in person at the shows. And I got a taste back for life again, like, doing things and meeting friends. So what I did was flash forward to around 2015, I made it seasonal. So from May to September each year, I would exclusively sell on shows. Now, sold shows, maybe 20% of my shows all year round, but then I would exclusively have completely sold on shows, whether it's fundraisers, agricultural shows, fairs, Six Flags. You have them over in the States, places like that. And that was great. So I'd have 6 months of doing that, selling merchandise. Now, they weren't particularly a wrestling audience, but it was guaranteed money. It wasn't the same as that stress of needing return business from each town you go to, So that's what it turned into for me. And then when COVID came along, obviously I didn't run 2020. But then I was just like, you know what? I put my interests elsewhere. So I work in social care. I work with people with intellectual disabilities. As a result of that, like I said, I started writing more creative stuff, short films. I put a lot of my time into a trade union called Forza. They're the biggest public sector trade union in the country of Ireland. So I worked my way up to the branch chairperson with them. So I have been putting my energies and so forth in other places, but it's more productive, it's more professional there. Unfortunately, wrestling, unless you're at a certain level, it's not really professional as such, So I'm quite happy with what I'm doing now. Will I go back to promoting wrestling? As it stands at this moment, no. One of the main reasons is I don't miss it, the drama of it. And the second is there was a promoter that ran here for a while, and he would give out free tickets, cheap merchandise. He basically salted the earth in all these towns, so it was very hard to go back to them. There's a lot of work that needs to get done there before those towns can get built back up. So I don't particularly have the interest to invest time and money into building those towns up to where maybe they'll come back to what they were 5 years ago, or maybe they won't. So I'm not willing to take that risk. I'd rather invest somewhere else. I might go back to promoting music gigs again instead of that. So as a result, unfortunately, wrestling in Ireland at the moment has two sides. So one side, it's very small and regional. So if you're a fan, you're like, oh my God, there's so many promotions in Ireland these days. It's great. Loads of shows to go with it. But it's such a mixture of promotions. So you have ones that are run out of their gym once every couple of months, say, in spots around the country. That's going to regress to what it was in the day. So when I ran in the day nationally, you had Orrick Williams, Peter Nulty before that, like proper nationwide promotions. It's regressed that way. Now, on the flip side, you have OTT, which is a tremendous promotion, tremendous. The production levels are through the roof. They're bringing a host of international talent. Their core guys that they have are top shelf. I wouldn't look at Irish or OTT as the top promotion in Ireland. I would look at it as one of the top promotions in Europe. It's really is very good. Now, I know on the network you have, I'm trying to think of the English promotion, German, WXW, Insane, the Scottish group, and Progress. Progress is the English promotion. OTT, I know those talks there at one stage, I have them on it, and something happened that fell through there. But they do deserve to be on there with the level of production that they have got, which is unfortunate. And I think currently at the moment, even though it's in German, I think the WXW show is the best show on the network. It's colourful, has a lot more promos, it's subtitled. I think that's a good, proper wrestling show, the way it's formatted. So it'd be interesting to see if there's any more of that on the network going forward. Back in the day, there was a guy, Felix, I think Felix left there. Felix Kronenberg was in WXW. There used to be Booster Fontaine in France. They were all these different promoters. So if I was bringing somebody in, I'd work a deal out with them that they would use them for X amount of dates. That way you get a better deal on these wrestlers. So they might come down on their rate. Well, they normally would if they get an X amount of shows around Europe. I had the likes of Tracy Smothers that would come in for tours. Then he'd go on to the rest of Europe, Big Vito, Doug Basham, Balls Mahoney, your Kid Cash, Bobby Fish. There's a whole host of names that came in through Irish Whip over the years, and toured with us all around the country, Tracy Smothers, I have to say, was a gentleman, absolute character.
Oh, yeah.
And 1 second he could beat you up. Next second he would be our best friend, but lovable guy, very good with younger talent, excellent on the show. Do anything you ask him to do. Like, unfortunately, he did pass away, but in Ireland we never had that caliber of veterans to train guys in. Whereas now we do, obviously, just likes of Ballymun Bruiser, Garrett Kidd, Paddy Morrow, Max O'Brennan, so forth. There's good quality talent, and obviously if Shamus and Finn Balor and Becky ever come back to live in Ireland, you have that there. But just unfortunately, back in the day, you didn't have that. So wrestling, it's quite changed now in Ireland compared to what it was in the day, and I feel it's missing psychology, storytelling, and the good drama of hooking people to make them want to see it again and come back for a return business. That's why if promotions anywhere in the world were to run the same venue every few months and have a few of them and get that return business, it builds, you will learn how to tell stories through characters and with your wrestlers to get them to keep coming back rather than once a year or once every 2 years. But look, everything in life changes. Wrestling has to change with that. Look at your streaming services now. Look at the production values of groups like OTT, WXW, tremendous. Like, really has changed for the better. And in some areas, it hasn't changed for the better as regards to storytelling. I think everybody wants to do comedy these days, really, don't they? Kind of the cool
Yeah.
deal, which is not great. Like,
Yeah, don't like either one of those. Yeah.
I had a friend of mine, a Canadian guy called Trevor, but he wrestled as Vid Vane, and had him for a few tours in the day. He used to train Shames and that when he would come over. And you'd have Tom Pritchard on your podcast,
Oh yeah. Dr.
don't you? Yeah.
Tom. Yeah.
So Tom Pritchard was the talent relations guy at the time, and when Vid Vane would go up there for his tryouts, Tom was the guy there. And I remember Trev saying at the time, he go for his tryouts and he felt like this close to getting signed. He had a good relationship with Tom Pritchard. And then Tom Pritchard was gone, and then it changed, and John Laurinaitis came in. So it really is, again, so he would have been a Tom Pritchard guy. And people, you have to realize how a corporate company works, not just wrestling, corporate businesses. When a new executive comes in, they like to do things their way. And anything that's productive or positive has to be a result of them. So I unfortunately think that Trevor, if Tom Pritchard had stayed on, Trevor would have had a career with the WWE,
Yeah, definitely. So as we hit the wind down, we head towards the finish here. What's next? Any TV projects? Any film projects? What's next?
Actually, what I'm working on at the moment, well, about 2 years ago, I put a teleplay together for a half-an-hour comedy show with wrestling. Now, I hadn't got it formatted correctly. I thought I had it formatted correctly. So I sent it on to some people I know in production companies here in Ireland, but they told me that realistically I would have to format it. It said it wasn't to do with the story of the characters. It's the way it had to be formatted for them to show it to a legit production company who would invest money in it. So I went off, I'm doing some workshops at the moment of how to format a proper TV script. I suppose it's like wrestling. I did it off my own back, but realistically, I should have gone to a wrestling school and learned how to do bumping and stuff like that before I would actually go to a legit company, So I'm working on that. Again, I'm when I have that format to industry standards, I'm going to start shipping that around again. I'm having fun with the podcast at the moment. I'm only going to do about maybe 12, 14 episodes of it, just about the history of what Irish Whip is in wrestling. And the only guests I have in there are past Irish Whip wrestling personalities or wrestlers. So I'm enjoying that. I set up the YouTube channel, the algorithms. You'd nearly have to have a degree in algorithms to understand YouTube, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yep.
How it
Crazy.
works. Ads and that. So I have plans in my personal life, but from a professional point of view, creativity to generate an income. Unfortunately, with TV shows and scripts, it's a very long process. So I don't know. I still have promoting in me. I'm working on a children's stage show at the moment. It's about my version of what Irish fairies are like. It's obviously aimed at young children. So I have some sketches done for that, some preliminary stories. So I'm going to hopefully show that too. We have I can't think what they're called offhand, but we have our own group here in Ireland that have sold on a number of shows to Nickelodeon in the States. So as soon as I have it together, I'm going to go through an agent and send her on to them. And touch wood, it works out, like, you know.
Yeah,
And
hopefully it
if
works out.
anybody decides to come along and run a territory in Ireland and build the holes back up that were dug, then I might come on their backs and
Yeah, nice. So
run
what?
again. But, you know, but in fairness to OTT now, they are bringing in for audiences that international fan or international wrestlers, like Irish Whip did back in the day, like, you know. Um, if it was to go back, I suppose no, never go back, because if it was to go back, you wouldn't have the streaming, you wouldn't have the same areas to make an income back in the day. You had DVDs basically and merchandise and ticket sales and sponsorships, whereas now there's so many different areas to make money. Like you have Cameo, you have GoFundMe's. There's so many areas for wrestlers and promotions to make monies these days, like, you know, that wasn't around back in the day. And fair play to them that they have those avenues, like, you know.
Oh yeah, big time, big time. So before we let you go, where can everybody find you and the podcast and everything else, social media wise?
So you can check out Irish Whip Wrestling on Instagram and on Facebook. I have the Suicide Fighter YouTube channel, which has the Irish Whip Wrestling footage, suicide awareness videos, and it has the Irish Whip Wrestling Chronicles podcast. And that podcast is available on Anchor FM, Spotify, and all other usual locations. John, thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it. It was
Yeah, thank you.
an
Thank you for
interesting
all the time. I
conversation.
appreciate it. Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Cheers, John.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.